confident.
In this life. Yeah.
No, sir.
Yeah, because I sure to hear you a little louder. Y'all willing to fight?
You know what I'm after?
To capitalize on Michael's success. And we need to start selling. So?
I just want to do my own thing. Ideas in my head.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
When you think about Michael Jackson, it is almost impossible to separate the man from the legend. For decades, his name has represented something much bigger than music. He was a performer, a dancer, a songwriter, and an artist who completely changed the way pop stars connected with audiences. But behind all of that fame was a complicated person whose journey began long before the world knew him as the king of pop. That is where Michael begins, taking us back to the young boy whose extraordinary talent was discovered inside a family that was determined to make it in the music business. The story starts with Michael as a child, surrounded by his brothers and pushed into performing at an age when most children were simply enjoying their childhood. His natural ability quickly becomes impossible to ignore. While the other members of the Jackson family are talented, Michael has something different. There is a sensitivity in the way he performs, but at the same time, there is an unbelievable confidence whenever he steps in front of an audience. That contrast becomes one of the most interesting parts of his journey because the boy who appears so powerful on stage is still trying to understand himself away from the spotlight. His father, Joe Jackson, plays a major role in shaping the young Michael. Joe sees the potential in his sons and pushes them relentlessly. Rehearsals become a major part of their lives, and mistakes are not easily forgiven. Michael's talent grows because of that discipline, but the pressure also begins to leave a mark on him. The movie does not simply show a young performer becoming successful overnight. Instead, it gives us a sense of how much work, sacrifice, and family pressure were behind the performances audiences eventually came to love. As the Jackson 5 begin gaining attention, Michael slowly becomes the center of the group. His voice stands out, his stage presence becomes impossible to ignore, and audiences quickly notice that this child has something special. The group moves from small performances toward bigger opportunities, and eventually their success changes the entire family's life. Michael is still young, but the expectations placed on him are already enormous. Every performance has to be better than the last, and the world begins expecting more from him before he has even had the chance to discover who he wants to become. One of the most fascinating things about this part of the movie is watching Michael's transformation happen gradually. He does not suddenly become the superstar everyone remembers. We see the pieces coming together. His voice develops, his confidence grows, and his understanding of performance becomes more sophisticated. He watches other performers, learns from the people around him, and begins developing ideas of his own. Eventually, it becomes clear that Michael is not satisfied with simply being part of a successful group. There is something much bigger inside his imagination. The relationship between Michael and his family also becomes increasingly complicated. His brothers are his teammates, but they are also competing for attention within the same group. Joe is both a father and a demanding manager, creating a situation where family life and professional life are almost impossible to separate. Michael's mother, Catherine, provides a very different kind of presence. Her support gives him an emotional place to return to when the pressure becomes overwhelming. These relationships help explain why Michael's rise is not simply a story about fame. It is also a story about family, expectations, and the cost of becoming extraordinary at such a young age. As Michael grows older, his ambitions begin expanding beyond the Jackson 5. He wants to experiment. He wants to create something that belongs entirely to him. This is where his solo career starts becoming one of the most important parts of the story. Instead of simply repeating what has already worked, Michael begins looking for new sounds, new ideas, and new ways to perform. His desire to control his own artistic direction becomes stronger, and the people around him slowly realize that he may be capable of reaching a level of success that nobody expected. The movie then moves toward the period when Michael's solo identity starts taking shape. His performances become more polished, his image becomes more distinctive, and his confidence as an artist continues to grow. He is no longer simply the young singer from the Jackson 5. He is becoming Michael Jackson, a performer who wants every part of his work to feel unique. That ambition becomes one of the driving forces behind everything that follows. Then comes the moment when his career begins moving into another dimension. Michael's music starts reaching audiences on a massive scale, and his performances become events rather than ordinary concerts. People are not only listening to him anymore. They are watching him, studying his movements, copying his style, and waiting to see what he will do next. His ability to combine music and performance becomes one of his greatest strengths, but success also brings a new kind of pressure. The larger Michael becomes, the less privacy he has. Every decision attracts attention, every performance is analyzed, and every change in his appearance becomes a subject of conversation. The movie begins showing the difference between the person Michael wants to be and the public image that the world creates around him. That tension becomes increasingly important as his career continues to explode. At the center of everything is Michael's obsession with creating something unforgettable. He does not want to simply release successful songs. He wants to build experiences. He wants choreography, music, costumes, visuals, and performance to work together as one complete artistic statement. That mindset eventually helps transform him from a successful singer into a global phenomenon. And just when it seems like Michael has reached the highest level possible, the movie makes it clear that he is only getting started. The young boy who once stood beside his brothers is now becoming an artist with ambitions that extend far beyond the stage. His next chapter will bring some of the biggest performances and most important creative decisions of his career, while also revealing how difficult it can be to live inside a world where millions of people believe they know you. That is what makes this first part of Michael's journey so compelling. It is not simply about how a talented child became famous. It is about how that child was shaped by family, pressure, ambition, music, and an almost impossible desire to become the best performer in the world. And as Michael moves closer to the height of his success, the distance between the superstar everyone sees and the private person behind that image becomes harder and harder to ignore. By this point in the story, Michael Jackson is no longer trying to prove that he has talent. The world already knows it. The challenge now is something completely different. He has to figure out how to stay ahead of an audience that has become accustomed to being surprised by him. Every new song, every performance, and every appearance creates another expectation. Instead of simply following trends, Michael wants to create them. And that ambition pushes him into a new stage of his career. One of the strongest elements of this part of the story is the attention given to Michael's creative process. He is not presented as someone who simply walks into a studio, records a song, and waits for it to become successful. He becomes deeply involved in the details. The sound has to feel right. The performance has to feel right. Even the smallest movement can matter. That perfectionism becomes part of what makes him extraordinary. But it also shows how difficult it can be for someone who refuses to settle for anything less than what he imagines in his head. As his popularity grows, Michael begins working with some of the most important people in the music industry. Collaborations become opportunities to learn, but they also give him the chance to test his own ideas. He is constantly absorbing information from the people around him while still trying to maintain his own identity. This balance becomes especially important because Michael does not want to be remembered as someone who simply benefited from other people's talent. He wants his artistic fingerprints to be visible everywhere. Then the performances become bigger. The stage becomes more than a place where Michael sings. It becomes a world that he controls. The lighting, choreography, sound, costumes, and movement all come together, creating performances that audiences remember long after the music stops. His ability to command a crowd becomes almost unbelievable. And the movie uses this part of his career to show why his influence became so enormous. But behind those spectacular moments, another side of Michael begins to emerge. Fame has changed the way people interact with him. Everywhere he goes, people recognize him. Cameras follow him. Fans want a piece of his time. The more successful he becomes, the harder it becomes for him to experience an ordinary life. There is a strange contradiction at the heart of his success. Michael has achieved the level of fame he dreamed about, but that same fame makes normal life almost impossible. The movie also explores his relationship with creativity and identity. Michael is constantly trying to reinvent himself without losing the qualities that made audiences love him in the first place. That becomes especially important as his music moves into a new era. His earlier success has created enormous expectations, so anything new has to be bigger, stronger, and more memorable. The pressure is enormous, but Michael continues pushing forward. His relationship with his family remains an important emotional thread as well. The people who helped create his early success are still connected to his life, but Michael is no longer the same child who needed everyone around him to make decisions. He has developed his own vision and wants greater control over his career. That creates moments of tension because independence can be difficult when your entire childhood has been built around family and performance. At the same time, Michael's success begins affecting the people closest to him in different ways. Some see him as a brother and son, while the outside world sees him as an almost untouchable celebrity. Those two versions of Michael can exist at the same time, but they do not always fit together easily. The movie uses this contrast to remind us that behind every legendary performance is a human being dealing with relationships, expectations, and personal struggles. As the story approaches the height of Michael's early solo career, the scale becomes almost unbelievable. His music reaches audiences across the world, and his name becomes instantly recognizable. He is no longer simply a successful American artist. He has become a global cultural figure. His influence reaches music, dance, fashion, television, and live entertainment. The performances featured throughout this journey are important because they show how Michael changed the relationship between music and visual entertainment. A song could now become an entire event. A music video could feel like a short film. A dance move could become part of popular culture. Michael understands that audiences remember what they see just as much as what they hear, and he uses that knowledge to create a style that becomes uniquely his own. But the higher Michael climbs, the more complicated his public image becomes. People begin creating their own ideas about who he is. Some admire him, some are fascinated by him, others question his choices. The movie does not simply present fame as a reward. It shows how fame can become something that follows a person everywhere. Eventually, Michael reaches a point where the difference between the performer and the private individual becomes one of the central ideas of the story. On stage, he appears completely confident. Away from the spotlight, the situation is much more complicated. That contrast gives the character a human quality because it reminds us that extraordinary talent does not automatically make someone's personal life simple. The story ultimately builds toward Michael's transition into one of the most recognizable performers in modern history. By the time the film reaches its later moments, the transformation is complete. The young boy who once performed alongside his brothers has become an artist capable of filling enormous stages and commanding the attention of millions of people. And that is where this chapter of Michael's story leaves us. Not with a simple answer about who Michael Jackson was, but with a much more complicated picture of how the legend was created. The movie focuses heavily on his rise, his family, his creativity, his performances, and the extraordinary ambition that pushed him forward. At the same time, it leaves the audience with the feeling that there is still much more of his life that could be explored. That becomes especially interesting because Michael's story does not end with his early success. In many ways, that is only the beginning of the most complicated chapters of his life. The controversies, the enormous pressure of worldwide fame, the personal struggles, and the events that shaped his later years all remain beyond the main period covered here. So when the story reaches its final moments, it does not feel like we have watched an ordinary rise to fame movie. We have watched a young performer become a global icon while trying to protect his creativity and identity along the way. And perhaps the biggest question left hanging over the story is not whether Michael became famous, because we already know the answer to that. The real question is what that level of fame ultimately cost him. That is what makes Michael such an interesting starting point for a much longer story. The legend is already there, the music is already unforgettable, and the performances have already changed entertainment forever. But behind the legend is a person whose journey was far more complicated than the spotlight could ever show. And that is exactly where the next chapter of his story would have to begin. As Michael moves deeper into the next stage of his career, the biggest challenge is no longer becoming famous. He has already achieved something that very few artists ever experience. His name is known around the world, his music has reached audiences far beyond America, and his performances have become a standard that other entertainers are trying to match. But reaching the top creates a strange problem. Once you become the person everyone is watching, there is almost nowhere else to go except forward. Michael understands that, and instead of slowing down, he becomes even more determined to create something that feels completely different from anything audiences have seen before. His approach to music begins changing as well. He is not interested in making songs that disappear after a few weeks. He wants music that stays with people. Every track has to have its own personality, and every performance has to give the audience something they will remember. This is where Michael's perfectionism becomes even more important. He can spend enormous amounts of time working on small details that most people would never notice. To the audience, the finished performance may look effortless, but behind that effortless appearance is an incredible amount of preparation. The movie gives us a closer look at that process because it helps explain why Michael's performances became so different from those of other artists. He does not simply think about singing. He thinks about movement, timing, atmosphere, storytelling, and emotion. A song can begin quietly and then suddenly explode into a massive performance. A simple movement can become the moment everyone talks about afterward. Michael understands that a great performer has to control the audience's attention, and he becomes exceptionally good at doing exactly that. As his reputation grows, the pressure surrounding his next projects becomes enormous. People are no longer waiting for Michael to release something good. They are expecting something extraordinary. That difference matters. When an artist is unknown, success can come from surprise. But when everyone already believes you are one of the best, expectations become almost impossible to satisfy. Michael feels that pressure, yet he continues to push himself because he knows that repeating the past would eventually make his work feel ordinary. At the same time, his personal world is becoming increasingly separated from his professional world. The public sees the superstar. They see the costumes, the lights, the choreography, and the screaming crowds. But away from the stage, Michael is dealing with the reality of being recognized almost everywhere he goes. Ordinary experiences become difficult. Privacy becomes something he has to fight for, and even simple choices can attract public attention. That constant attention starts changing the way Michael experiences success. There was a time when fame was the goal. Now fame itself has become part of the challenge. He can walk into a room and immediately become the most important person there, but that does not necessarily mean he feels comfortable. In fact, the movie increasingly suggests that the bigger Michael becomes publicly, the more complicated his private world becomes. His relationship with the people around him also changes. Some individuals genuinely care about him, while others are interested in what being close to Michael can give them. That creates a difficult environment because it becomes harder to know who can be trusted. When someone reaches the level of fame Michael has reached, every relationship can become complicated by money, business, publicity, or expectations. Still, Michael remains focused on his work. Whenever he is creating music or preparing for a performance, he seems to find a place where all the outside noise disappears. The studio and the stage become environments where he can control what happens. That creative control is extremely important to him. Music is not simply his career anymore. It is the way he expresses emotions that he may not always know how to communicate in ordinary life. His performances also begin taking on a larger emotional meaning. Michael does not simply want audiences to watch him. He wants them to feel something: excitement, happiness, surprise, even wonder. That emotional connection becomes one of the reasons his concerts develop such a powerful reputation. People are not only attending to hear familiar songs, they are attending because they want to experience Michael Jackson performing live. But with every new achievement, the public becomes more curious about the person behind the performance. The fascination with Michael begins extending beyond his music. His appearance, personality, lifestyle, and personal decisions become subjects of constant discussion. The movie uses this period to show how quickly a celebrity's private life can become public property once the world becomes obsessed with them. Michael himself appears increasingly aware of this problem. He knows that people are watching him, but he also understands that they often see only a version of him. The public creates an image, and once that image becomes powerful enough, it can be almost impossible for the real person to control it. This becomes one of the most important conflicts in his story. Michael wants to control his art, but he cannot completely control the way people interpret him. Meanwhile, his career continues moving forward. The scale of his success becomes larger, the audiences become bigger, and his influence spreads across generations. Younger performers begin studying his dancing. Musicians look at his approach to production. Music videos become more ambitious, and the idea of a pop star becomes increasingly connected to visual storytelling. Michael's impact can now be seen far beyond his own records. He is influencing the entire entertainment industry. Artists understand that a song can be more powerful when it is connected to an unforgettable visual experience. Performers realize that choreography can become part of an artist's identity. The boundaries between music, dance, fashion, and cinema begin becoming less important, and Michael is standing directly at the center of that change. Yet the movie never completely loses sight of the person underneath the phenomenon. There are moments where the excitement of success is balanced by the loneliness that can come with it. Michael can stand in front of thousands of people and receive an unbelievable amount of love, but that does not mean he can automatically trust the people around him. That contrast gives his journey a deeper emotional layer. As this chapter moves toward its later stages, Michael has reached a point where his reputation seems almost impossible to surpass. But the story is not interested in pretending that success has solved every problem. In fact, the opposite is happening. The larger his career becomes, the greater the expectations become. The more people admire him, the more closely they watch him, and the more control he gains over his art, the more attention his personal life receives. This is the point where Michael's journey begins, changing from a simple story of artistic ambition into something much more complicated. The world has created an icon, but icons are rarely allowed to behave like ordinary people. Every mistake becomes bigger, every decision is questioned, every change is analyzed, and Michael is about to enter a period where that reality will become impossible to ignore. His greatest creative achievements are still ahead, but so are some of the most difficult challenges of his life. The next stage will show what happens when an artist reaches a level of fame so enormous that the person behind the name can almost disappear beneath the legend. For now, though, Michael remains focused on one thing: creating. He keeps rehearsing, recording, performing, and searching for the next idea that can surprise the world. Because for Michael Jackson, standing still was never really an option. The moment he achieved one impossible goal, another one appeared in front of him. And that relentless drive is exactly what continues pushing his story forward. By this stage, Michael has reached a level of fame that changes the rules completely. He is no longer simply an artist trying to build a career. He has become a global name, and that means every move he makes is suddenly important to millions of people. A new song is not just a song anymore. A performance is not simply a performance. Everything becomes an event, and that constant expectation creates a different kind of pressure. Michael knows that audiences have already seen him do extraordinary things, so he becomes determined to give them something they have never experienced before. His creativity becomes even more ambitious. He starts thinking beyond individual songs and focusing on complete experiences where music, movement, visuals, and storytelling all work together. This approach becomes one of the defining features of his career, because Michael understands something that many performers are only beginning to realize. People may remember a song, but they remember an unforgettable experience even longer. In the studio, that ambition can make the creative process extremely demanding. Michael listens closely to every sound and pays attention to details that might seem insignificant to someone else. A rhythm has to feel right. A vocal has to carry the correct emotion. The arrangement has to build naturally. He is constantly searching for that moment when everything suddenly feels complete. Sometimes that means changing something that already sounds good simply because he believes it can become better. That perfectionism is one of the reasons his work stands apart, but it also creates tension. When everyone around you is waiting for a project to be finished, continuing to make changes can be frustrating for other people. Michael, however, is not interested in releasing something just because the deadline has arrived. For him, the work has to match the vision in his head. If it does not, he keeps going. Outside the studio, the pressure is just as intense. Michael's popularity has reached a point where privacy is becoming almost impossible. Fans want to see him everywhere, journalists want information about him, and photographers are constantly looking for the next image that will attract attention. His personal life becomes a subject of public fascination, even when the things being discussed have nothing to do with his music. This creates a strange contradiction. Michael has spent years building a career that depends on connecting with audiences, yet the same connection eventually makes it difficult for him to live normally. The world wants access to him, while Michael increasingly needs distance from the world. That conflict becomes one of the quiet struggles running underneath his success. His relationships with the people around him become more important during this period. Some individuals understand the person behind the superstar, while others are primarily interested in the business surrounding him. As Michael's career becomes more valuable, it becomes harder to know whether someone is approaching him because they genuinely care or because they want something from him. That uncertainty affects the way he interacts with people. Trust becomes extremely important, but trust is also difficult to establish when everyone knows your name and understands how valuable your success can be. Michael has to make decisions about who belongs in his inner circle, while at the same time dealing with an industry that is constantly changing around him. Still, whenever Michael steps onto a stage, that uncertainty seems to disappear. The performer takes control. The music begins, the audience reacts, and Michael becomes completely focused on the moment. His ability to transform in front of a crowd is one of the most remarkable parts of his character. Whatever pressure exists behind the scenes, He knows how to leave it there once the performance begins. The movie uses these performances to show why Michael became such a powerful influence. His dancing is not treated as something separate from his music. Every movement has purpose. A pause can create suspense. A sudden turn can become the moment everyone remembers. Even the way he stands can communicate something. He has developed an understanding of stage presence that makes him seem larger than the stage itself. As his influence spreads, other performers begin adopting elements of his style. His choreography inspires dancers. His music videos raise expectations for what visual storytelling can be. His fashion choices become recognizable. The image of the modern pop superstar is being reshaped in real time, and Michael is one of the main people responsible for that transformation. But influence brings another challenge. When you become the person everyone is copying, the audience begins expecting you to keep inventing. Michael cannot simply repeat what worked before because repetition would weaken the very image that made him successful. He has to keep changing while somehow remaining recognizable. That pressure becomes particularly important as he works on new music. Every project carries the weight of everything he has already achieved. A successful album is no longer enough. It has to feel like a major cultural moment. A successful performance is not enough. It has to create a memory. Michael's ambition continues pushing him toward bigger ideas, and this is where his career begins reaching a truly extraordinary scale. He is thinking about music videos almost like films. He is thinking about concerts like theatrical productions. He is thinking about himself not simply as a singer, but as a complete entertainer capable of controlling every part of the audience's experience. The more successful this approach becomes, the more difficult it is for Michael to separate his professional identity from his personal identity. The world increasingly sees Michael Jackson as a character rather than simply a human being. People develop expectations about how he should look, how he should behave, and what he should create. That creates a growing emotional distance between Michael and the public. Millions of people feel connected to him through his music, but very few truly know what his private life feels like. The audience sees the finished product. They do not see the long rehearsals, the uncertainty, the pressure, or the moments when Michael questions whether he can meet the expectations placed on him. And that is where the story becomes more personal. Michael's success has given him enormous creative freedom, but it has also taken away parts of the ordinary life he might once have imagined. He cannot simply walk through a public place without being recognized. He cannot make a mistake without risking worldwide attention. Even silence can become a story when the entire world is watching you. Despite all of this, Michael continues moving forward. His instinct is still to create rather than retreat. Whenever the outside world becomes overwhelming, he returns to music, performance, and imagination. These are the areas where he feels most comfortable because they allow him to communicate without having to explain himself directly. The story is now approaching one of the most important phases of his career. Michael has already proven that he can become a superstar. Now he is about to prove that he can redefine what a superstar actually means. His next achievements will not simply make him more famous. They will change the expectations placed on every major performer who comes after him. But the bigger the legend becomes, the greater the danger of losing sight of the person behind it. And as Michael moves forward, that balance between the icon and the individual will become increasingly difficult to maintain. The world is ready for the next version of Michael Jackson. What it does not yet understand is just how massive that next chapter is going to become. The next stage of Michael's journey begins with a simple idea that becomes much bigger than anyone expects. If the audience already knows what he can do, then the only way forward is to show them something they have never seen before. Michael is no longer competing simply with other singers. He is competing with his own reputation. Every success from the past becomes another expectation hanging over whatever he creates next. That pressure could easily overwhelm an artist, but for Michael, it becomes fuel. He starts approaching his work with an even clearer vision. Music has always been at the center of his life, but now he understands that the way a song is presented can be just as powerful as the song itself. He wants audiences to hear something memorable, but he also wants them to see it, feel it, and remember exactly where they were when they experienced it. That mindset pushes him toward a style of entertainment where music and visual storytelling become almost inseparable. In the studio, Michael's attention to detail becomes intense. He can hear tiny differences that other people might overlook, and he is constantly looking for ways to make a track stronger. A vocal may sound excellent, but he may still want another take because the emotion is not quite right. A rhythm may already work, but he may want to change the timing because the movement he imagines for the performance needs something different. For Michael, the recording is only one part of the final experience. That perfectionism also explains why working with him can be demanding. People around him have to understand that he is chasing an idea that exists very clearly in his mind, even when it is difficult to explain to someone else. Sometimes he knows exactly what he wants. Other times, he discovers it through experimentation. Either way, he refuses to stop until the finished result feels right. As the work develops, Michael's confidence as an artist becomes more obvious. The young performer who once depended heavily on the people around him is becoming someone who can make major creative decisions on his own. He knows what kind of sound he wants, what kind of visual world he wants to create, and how he wants the audience to react. That growing independence changes the balance between Michael and the people who helped guide his early career. He still values his family, but he is no longer simply following instructions. He has his own ideas and his own ambitions. Sometimes those ambitions create disagreements, because becoming independent means challenging the expectations that were placed on him when he was younger. For Michael, however, artistic independence is becoming more important than ever. He has reached a point where he understands that his career can only continue growing if he is willing to take risks. Playing it safe might protect what he already has, but it will not create anything new. Meanwhile, the public fascination with him continues increasing. People want to know what he is working on, what he will look like next, and where his career is going. The anticipation surrounding his music becomes almost as powerful as the music itself. Michael realizes that expectations can be useful if he knows how to control them, and he becomes increasingly careful about what he reveals before a project is ready. That sense of mystery becomes part of his image. Instead of explaining everything, Michael often lets the work speak for him. When something new finally appears, the audience experiences it without knowing exactly what to expect. That surprise becomes one of his strongest tools. His live performances continue evolving as well. Michael understands that standing on a stage and simply singing is no longer enough for him. He wants movement, drama, lighting, and carefully designed moments that can make an audience feel like they are watching something impossible. Every section of a performance has a purpose. This is also where his dancing becomes increasingly important. Michael's movements are not simply choreography added after the music has been created. They are part of the music itself. His body becomes another instrument, communicating rhythm and emotion in a way that words cannot. As audiences become more familiar with his style, certain movements begin turning into cultural moments. People imitate them at home, dancers study them, and other entertainers begin incorporating similar ideas into their own performances. Michael is no longer simply participating in popular culture. He is actively shaping it. Yet the bigger his influence becomes, the more complicated his relationship with the public becomes. People begin treating every part of his life as something they have a right to discuss. His appearance becomes a topic. His personality becomes a topic. Even his private choices can become headlines. The attention is no longer limited to his music. Michael has to learn how to live with the fact that the world is interested in him whether he wants that attention or not. There are moments when the attention feels like appreciation, but there are also moments when it feels invasive. The distinction between admiration and obsession can become very thin when someone reaches his level of fame. Still, he keeps returning to the studio. That is where his focus remains strongest. Away from cameras and crowds, he can concentrate on the thing that brought him this far in the first place, creating music. The studio becomes a place where he can experiment without worrying about how the public will react. As the new project begins taking shape, the people around Michael can sense that something important is happening. The music sounds different. The ideas are bigger. The ambition is stronger. Michael is not trying to make another successful record. He is trying to create something that can define an era. That goal carries enormous pressure, but Michael seems almost energized by it. He knows that history will remember the artists who took risks, not the ones who simply repeated what was already popular. He wants his work to have a life beyond the moment of release. And slowly, the pieces begin coming together. Songs are refined. Performances are developed. Visual concepts take shape. Michael's ideas are becoming more complete, and the excitement around his next move continues building. But there is another side to this progress. The closer Michael gets to the top, the less room there is for mistakes. When an unknown artist experiments, people may forgive failure. When Michael Jackson experiments, the entire world is watching. Every risk carries consequences. That reality makes his determination even more remarkable. He continues pushing because he understands that greatness rarely comes from comfort. He wants to create something that people will still remember years later, even if achieving that goal requires exhausting himself in the process. At this point, Michael's career is moving toward a moment that will define not only his own legacy but the future of pop music itself. The boy who once stood on stage with his brothers has become an artist with the power to influence an entire generation. And the most important part is that he is still not satisfied. He believes there is something bigger waiting just ahead, something that can change the way people see him forever, something that will transform a successful performer into an icon whose influence reaches far beyond music. The world is waiting, Michael is preparing, and once the next chapter begins, there will be no going back. There will be no going back. The pressure surrounding Michael's next move is now almost impossible to ignore. He has reached a point where people are not simply waiting for new music. They are waiting for an event. The audience expects him to surprise them. Critics are watching closely, and the people working around him understand that whatever comes next could define the next stage of his career. For Michael, that pressure becomes another reason to keep pushing himself rather than stepping back. What makes this period so interesting is that Michael is beginning to think on a much larger scale. He is no longer looking at a song as an isolated piece of music. He sees it as part of a complete world. The sound, the visuals, the choreography, the emotion, and even the way the audience discovers the project all matter. He wants everything connected, because he understands that the strongest artistic experiences are the ones where nothing feels accidental. Inside the studio, the process becomes demanding. Michael keeps returning to the same material, listening carefully, changing small details, and experimenting with different ideas. Sometimes a track that sounds finished to everyone else still does not feel finished to him. He is searching for a very specific emotional impact, and he knows that reaching it may require more time than anyone originally expected. This is also where his relationship with collaborators becomes important. Michael may have a clear vision, but bringing that vision to life requires other talented people. Musicians, producers, dancers, choreographers, directors, and technicians all contribute to the final result. The challenge is making sure that every contribution supports the larger idea instead of distracting from it. Michael's ability to recognize talent becomes one of his strengths. He understands that he does not have to do everything himself. What he does need is the ability to bring the right people together and communicate the feeling he wants. When that combination works, the result can be much bigger than what any individual person could create alone. At the same time, Michael's personal life continues becoming more complicated. The larger his career becomes, the more difficult it is to know where the private person ends and the public figure begins. People who have never met him have opinions about his personality. Fans feel emotionally connected to him through his music. Journalists want to understand his life, and strangers feel as though they know him because they have watched him perform for years. That creates an unusual kind of loneliness. Michael can be surrounded by thousands of people and still feel completely separated from them. The crowd knows the performer, but the performer knows that they do not necessarily know the person underneath the image. The movie uses this contrast carefully. One moment we see Michael commanding an enormous audience, and the next we are reminded that the person behind that performance still has ordinary emotions. He can be excited, nervous, frustrated, or uncertain. Fame does not remove those feelings. It simply makes them harder to express privately. His creative work becomes one of the few places where he can communicate freely. Through music, Michael can express emotions without having to explain them directly. Through dance, he can communicate energy and vulnerability at the same time. Through performance, he can create a version of himself that feels completely confident. This is one reason the stage becomes so important to him. When Michael performs, he controls the environment. The lights come up, the music starts, and the outside world temporarily disappears. For those few minutes, he does not have to worry about rumors, expectations, or the cameras following him. He only has to perform. And when he performs, the response is overwhelming. The audience reacts to every movement. A single gesture can create an eruption of excitement. A pause can build anticipation. Then, when the music returns, the entire crowd moves with him. This ability to control thousands of people through rhythm and movement becomes one of the defining characteristics of Michael's career. But there is something else happening beneath the spectacle. Michael's performances are beginning to influence how other artists think about entertainment. Singers are realizing that they can become dancers. Dancers are becoming more important in music videos. Music videos themselves are becoming more cinematic. The traditional boundaries between different forms of entertainment are starting to disappear. Michael is helping create that change because he refuses to think of himself as only a singer. He is an entertainer in the fullest sense of the word. If an idea can make the audience feel something, he wants to explore it. That philosophy also explains why he pays so much attention to visual presentation. He understands that an audience's memory is shaped by images. A song can become more powerful when people associate it with a specific performance, a specific movement, or a specific visual moment. As his next major project continues developing, the anticipation around it grows. People begin wondering what Michael will do next. Will he change his sound? Will his performances become bigger? Will he introduce something nobody has seen before? Michael does not reveal much. He keeps working. That silence only increases the curiosity, and eventually, the work begins moving from the studio into the larger world. Rehearsals become more intense. Performances are planned in greater detail. Every element is tested repeatedly because Michael knows that once the audience sees it, there is no opportunity to take it back. This period also reveals how demanding his standards can be. He wants the dancers to move with precision. He wants the musicians to understand exactly where each moment belongs. He wants the lighting to support the emotion instead of simply looking impressive. Nothing is included simply because it looks expensive. Everything has to serve the performance. That level of control can be exhausting, but Michael believes it is necessary. He knows that the audience may only see a few minutes of the finished performance. While he sees every mistake and every detail that could be improved, the closer the project gets to completion, the more Michael begins to resemble the performer the world will eventually remember. The confidence is stronger, the movements are more precise, the creative vision is clearer, but the pressure is also greater than ever. He has created success before, now he wants to create history. And there is a difference between those two things. Success belongs to the present. History belongs to the future. Michael is thinking about the future. He wants to create music that people will still hear years later. He wants performances that future artists will study. He wants his work to become something larger than himself. That ambition is exactly what drives the next major turning point in his story. The world has already seen Michael Jackson become a star. Now it is about to see him become something much bigger. But with that transformation comes a price. The more powerful the image becomes, the more difficult it will be for Michael to escape it. The expectations will become heavier, the scrutiny will become stronger, and the line between admiration and obsession will become increasingly blurred. For now, though, none of that is stopping him. The music is ready, the performance is taking shape, and Michael is standing at the edge of the moment that could change everything. The closer Michael gets to the biggest moment of his career, the more obvious it becomes that he is not simply preparing another project. He is building something that he believes can completely change the way people experience a pop performer. The difference is important because Michael has already achieved success. What he wants now is something much harder to create, a moment that feels impossible to repeat. The preparations become increasingly intense. Every part of the performance has to work together, from the music to the choreography and from the lighting to the smallest movement. Michael is deeply involved in the process because he knows exactly how quickly an audience can lose interest. He wants every second to have a purpose. There can be no wasted movement, no unnecessary pause, and no part of the performance that feels like it is simply filling time. For the people working with him, that level of perfection can be exhausting. Rehearsals continue until the movements become almost automatic. A sequence may be repeated again and again, not because it is completely wrong, but because Michael believes it can be sharper. He wants the dancers to move as one unit. He wants the timing to be exact. He wants the energy to rise naturally instead of appearing forced. Michael's own preparation is just as demanding. He studies his movements carefully and thinks about how the audience will see each moment. He is not only performing the choreography, he is thinking like a director, imagining the entire stage from the perspective of someone watching from the crowd. That ability to see the performance from both sides is one of the reasons his work feels so complete. Michael understands what it means to be the person on stage, but he also understands what the audience needs to feel. He knows when to hold back and when to explode with energy. He knows that anticipation can sometimes be more powerful than movement itself. Meanwhile, outside the rehearsal space, the public's fascination with Michael continues growing. People want to know what he is preparing, but he keeps much of the work private. The less information he gives, the more curiosity builds. Rumors begin spreading, expectations rise, and everyone starts wondering whether Michael can actually surpass what he has already accomplished. That question becomes part of the pressure. Can he do it again? Can he create another moment that feels completely new? Michael seems determined to answer both questions through the work rather than through words. As the performance develops, his use of dance becomes even more distinctive. Michael does not dance simply to demonstrate technical ability. His movements become part of the storytelling. A sharp gesture can communicate confidence. A slower movement can create vulnerability. A sudden change in rhythm can make the audience feel as though something unexpected is about to happen. This approach turns choreography into another form of language. The same philosophy appears in his music videos. Michael understands that a visual story can make people experience a song differently. Instead of simply standing in front of a camera and singing, he wants to create characters, settings, tension, and memorable moments. The result is a style that begins making music videos feel closer to short films. That change has a major effect on the entertainment industry. Record labels begin realizing that a major music release can be supported by much more than radio promotion. A powerful visual can become part of the identity of a song, and an artist who understands visual storytelling can reach audiences in ways that traditional performances cannot. Michael is becoming one of the clearest examples of that idea, but while his professional world is expanding, his private world remains complicated. The more famous he becomes, the more people around him have an opinion about what he should do. Managers think about business, producers think about music, media organizations think about stories, fans think about what they want from him. Michael has to navigate all of those expectations while trying to protect his own artistic instincts. Sometimes that means saying no, sometimes it means changing direction, and sometimes it means trusting his own judgment even when everyone around him is uncertain. That independence has become one of the defining features of his career. Michael is willing to take risks because he understands that his biggest achievements came from doing things differently. As the project moves toward completion, the atmosphere around him becomes more intense. Everyone knows that the final performance is approaching. There is excitement, but there is also nervousness. Once the work reaches the audience, all the months of preparation will be judged in a matter of minutes. Michael knows that. Yet when the moment finally arrives, he does not look nervous. He looks completely focused. The lights begin to change. The audience becomes quieter. Then the music starts. What happens next is the kind of performance that explains why Michael's career became so influential. He does not simply enter the stage and begin singing. He controls the audience's attention from the first second. Every movement appears deliberate. Every pause creates anticipation. Every burst of energy feels larger because it follows a moment of stillness. The crowd reacts instantly, and Michael gives them exactly what he has been preparing for. This is the moment where his reputation as a performer becomes more than reputation. It becomes an experience. People watching from the audience are not simply hearing familiar songs. They are watching an artist who understands how to turn performance into spectacle without losing the emotional connection at the center of the music. The reaction spreads beyond the venue. People begin talking about the performance, discussing the choreography, repeating the movements, and trying to understand how Michael managed to create something so memorable. For Michael, however, the performance is only one part of the larger journey. He is already thinking about what comes next. That is perhaps the most remarkable thing about him. Even after creating a moment that leaves an audience stunned, he does not seem satisfied for long. He immediately begins searching for the next idea. Success has become a moving target. The more he achieves, the higher he sets the standard. But this constant pursuit also creates another problem. Michael is becoming trapped by his own reputation. Every future performance will be compared to the moments that came before it. The audience will expect the same level of magic every time, even though creating something genuinely new is becoming increasingly difficult. This is the burden of becoming an icon. People do not simply want you to succeed. They want you to remain extraordinary forever. Michael continues accepting that challenge, but the pressure is beginning to build beneath the surface. His career is moving faster than ever. His public image is becoming larger than life, and the world is becoming increasingly interested in every part of him. The performer is becoming a global phenomenon. The person behind the performer is becoming harder to see. And as the story moves forward, that difference will become more important than ever, because Michael's greatest achievements are still ahead. But so are the moments that will test how much one person can carry when the entire world is watching. At this point, Michael has reached a level of recognition that very few artists in history have ever experienced. His name alone can attract enormous attention, and his performances have become something people actively wait for. But the bigger his reputation becomes, the harder it is to surprise the audience. Michael understands that better than anyone, which is why he keeps searching for new ways to make his work feel fresh. Instead of simply relying on the success he already has, he begins thinking about the future. He wants his music to feel modern, without losing the emotional quality that connects people to it. He wants his performances to become larger without turning them into empty spectacle. Most importantly, he wants to remain an artist rather than becoming someone who simply repeats a formula because it is safe. That desire for reinvention becomes one of the most important parts of his journey. Michael's creative process is constantly evolving. He listens to different sounds, experiments with rhythms, and works with people who can bring new ideas into his music. He is not afraid to take inspiration from different styles, because he understands that great music does not have to stay inside one category. His goal is to take familiar elements and transform them into something that feels uniquely his own. The studio becomes a place of experimentation. A song may begin with a simple melody and slowly become something much more complicated. A basic rhythm can turn into the foundation for an entire performance. Michael may hear an idea in his head before anyone else can understand what he is imagining. And part of the creative process is finding the right people to help translate that idea into reality. This is also where his reputation for perfection becomes even more obvious. Michael does not want a good song. He wants a song that feels complete. He does not want a good performance. He wants one that stays in the audience's memory. That difference may sound small, but it affects everything he does. The pressure surrounding him is enormous because everyone knows what he is capable of. When an artist is already considered one of the best, expectations can become almost impossible. Michael has to compete with the younger version of himself, the version who shocked audiences by doing things nobody expected. But instead of being afraid of that comparison, he uses it as motivation. He keeps moving, he keeps creating, and the world keeps watching. Away from the studio, Michael's fame continues affecting his everyday life. Simple things become difficult because he is rarely anonymous anymore. Going somewhere without attracting attention is almost impossible. People recognize him instantly, and cameras can appear at any moment. For someone who values creativity and personal space, that constant attention can be exhausting. The movie increasingly shows how fame can become both a gift and a burden. Michael has opportunities most people could never imagine, but he also loses freedoms most people take for granted. He cannot always make ordinary choices without wondering how the public will react. This creates a complicated relationship with the outside world. Michael needs audiences because performing is such an important part of his life, but he also needs distance from them. He wants people to appreciate his work without feeling as though they own every part of his personal life. That balance becomes harder to maintain as his popularity grows. The media becomes increasingly interested in him, and stories about his personal life begin competing with stories about his music. Sometimes the attention is positive, sometimes it is based on speculation. Either way, Michael's name is becoming news even when he is not releasing anything. This changes the way the public experiences him. People begin discussing Michael Jackson as a personality rather than simply as a musician. His image becomes almost as recognizable as his music. And that creates another challenge. Once the public becomes attached to an image of an artist, any change can become controversial. Michael's appearance changes over time. His fashion evolves. His performances become more ambitious. His personality appears increasingly private. People begin asking questions about why he is changing. Even though artists naturally change as they grow, older. Michael cannot control every interpretation. He can only control the work. So he continues focusing on music. This is where his artistic instincts become especially important. Rather than responding to every rumor or every opinion, Michael often allows his work to speak for him. A new song can say more about what he is feeling than a long interview ever could. His music becomes a kind of private language, and his performances become another way of communicating that language to millions of people. The larger his audience becomes, the more powerful that connection feels. People from completely different countries and backgrounds can hear the same song and feel connected to it. Michael's influence begins crossing cultural and geographic boundaries in a way that few artists have managed before. That international success changes the scale of his career. He is no longer simply an American superstar. He is becoming a worldwide cultural figure. His music is being played in different countries. His dance moves are being copied by people who may not even speak the same language. His videos are being watched by audiences who experience his work through images as much as through lyrics. Michael's ability to communicate without relying entirely on words becomes one of his greatest strengths. A movement can be understood anywhere. A rhythm can cross borders. An emotional performance does not need translation. That universality is part of what makes his influence so powerful. But with worldwide recognition comes worldwide scrutiny. More people means more opinions. More audiences mean more expectations. And the larger Michael's public image becomes, the more difficult it is to protect the private person behind it. The movie begins making that tension increasingly clear. There are moments where Michael appears completely in control, surrounded by people and performing with enormous confidence. Then there are quieter moments where the scale of his life feels almost overwhelming. The contrast is important because it prevents the story from becoming simply a celebration of fame. Michael's achievements are extraordinary, but the movie also reminds us that extraordinary success can come with extraordinary pressure. His creative ambition does not disappear because of that pressure. If anything, it becomes stronger. He continues imagining bigger performances. He continues experimenting with new sounds. He continues looking for new ways to surprise audiences. And slowly, another major chapter begins taking shape. Michael's career is approaching the point where his influence will extend beyond individual songs or performances. He is beginning to affect the way the entire music industry thinks about artists, albums, concerts, and visual storytelling. The modern pop superstar is changing, and Michael is one of the people leading that change. But as he moves further into this new era, the cost of his fame will become harder to ignore. The public image will become more powerful, the attention will become more intense, and the distance between Michael Jackson the performer and Michael Jackson the person will continue growing. He has spent years building the legend. Now he has to figure out how to live inside it, and that may prove to be much harder than creating it in the first place. By now, Michael has reached a stage where his success is no longer measured only by record sales or the size of a crowd. His influence has become part of the culture itself. People are studying his movements, discussing his music, copying his style, and waiting for his next decision. For Michael, however, this level of recognition creates a new challenge. He has to keep moving forward without allowing the image of the superstar to completely replace the person underneath it. The strange thing about becoming an icon is that people begin to expect consistency from someone whose entire career was built on change. Michael became successful because he was willing to experiment, but now every experiment is judged against everything he has already achieved. If he changes too much, people question the change. If he stays the same, people accuse him of repeating himself. There is almost no perfect answer. Michael responds in the way he knows best, by focusing on the work. Instead of spending all his energy trying to control what people think, he becomes even more involved in the creative process. He studies sounds, develops new performance ideas, and continues looking for ways to make his music feel bigger without losing its emotional core. His goal is not simply to create another successful project. He wants the next project to feel like a statement. That mindset affects the way he works with everyone around him. Producers and musicians may bring ideas into the studio, but Michael wants to understand every part of the final result. He listens carefully, asks questions, changes arrangements, and experiments until the music begins matching the feeling he has imagined. Sometimes that process is fast. Other times, it takes much longer. Michael is willing to wait because he believes the audience can tell when something has been rushed. That belief becomes increasingly important as the expectations surrounding him grow. The world is no longer interested in ordinary success from Michael Jackson. People want another cultural moment. They want another performance that everyone talks about. They want another song that becomes impossible to escape. Michael knows that expectation is there. He also knows that chasing it directly can be dangerous. So instead of asking what will make the biggest impact, he often starts with what feels creatively interesting to him. That approach allows him to remain an artist rather than turning his career into a constant attempt to satisfy public demand. Away from the studio, however, the pressure is harder to escape. Michael's personal life is becoming increasingly interesting to the public, and the media is always looking for something new to discuss. A simple appearance can generate headlines. A change in clothing can become a story. A decision that would be ignored if made by an ordinary person can suddenly become worldwide news simply because Michael Jackson made it. This level of attention changes the way he moves through the world. Privacy becomes valuable. Trust becomes complicated, and ordinary relationships become harder to maintain. The people around Michael have different roles in his life, and those roles can sometimes overlap. Friends can become business connections. Professional relationships can become personal. People who once seemed trustworthy can become difficult to understand when money and fame are involved. Michael has to navigate all of this while continuing to work, and that work remains his strongest connection to the outside world. Whenever he is on stage, the complicated parts of his life seem to disappear for a moment. The lights come on, the music begins, and he becomes completely focused. The audience responds immediately, and the performer they know takes over. This is where Michael appears most comfortable. He understands the stage. He understands rhythm. He understands how to create anticipation, and he understands something even more important. An audience wants to feel something. A technically perfect performance is not enough. Michael wants people to experience excitement, surprise, joy, and emotion. He wants them to leave feeling that they witnessed something they could not have experienced anywhere else. That philosophy continues influencing the way he approaches music videos. He sees them as opportunities to build worlds around his songs. Instead of simply showing himself performing, he wants to create stories that give the music another dimension. This approach helps transform the music video into a major part of the modern pop experience. An artist can now release a song and create an entire visual identity around it. The audience can remember the story, the choreography, and the imagery just as strongly as the melody. Michael understands the power of that connection better than almost anyone. His influence begins appearing everywhere. Young performers study his dance techniques. Directors study the way his videos are constructed. Choreographers study his timing. Fashion designers notice the way his stage image changes, and audiences begin expecting more from every major pop artist. The standard is rising. Michael is one of the reasons why, but there is an emotional cost to constantly being the person who raises the standard. Once you create something extraordinary, people begin treating extraordinary as normal. That means Michael has less room to simply be human. The public may forgive another artist for having an ordinary day, but Michael's ordinary moments can become stories. If he is quiet, people wonder why. If he changes his appearance, people speculate. If he disappears from the spotlight, people immediately want to know what is happening. The attention never really stops. And that constant pressure begins creating a deeper divide between Michael's public and private identities. On stage, he is confident and controlled. Away from the stage, the situation is far more complicated. The movie does not suggest that Michael has a simple answer to this problem. Instead, it shows how difficult it is to maintain a private identity when millions of people have already created their own version of you. The more famous Michael becomes, the more difficult it becomes to correct those assumptions. People may believe they understand him because they have watched him for years, but watching someone perform is not the same as knowing them. That distinction becomes increasingly important as the story moves forward. Michael continues working, however, because creating remains the one thing he can control. He can decide how a song sounds. He can decide how a performance moves. He can decide what emotion he wants the audience to feel. He cannot decide what every journalist will write. He cannot control every rumor. He cannot stop every camera, but he can control the art. And that is where he keeps returning. As the next major stage of his career approaches, there is a sense that Michael is preparing for something much larger than another release. The pieces are coming together slowly. Music, performance, visuals, and ambition are beginning to form one larger idea. the world may think it already knows what Michael Jackson can do. Michael knows better. He still has another level to reach. And reaching it will require him to take some of the biggest creative risks of his career. But this time, the challenge is not simply whether he can impress the audience. It is whether he can create something so powerful that it changes the definition of pop stardom all over again. The pressure is enormous. The expectations are higher than ever, and Michael is preparing to step directly into them. By this point, Michael's career has reached a stage where the idea of simply releasing another successful song almost feels too small for him. He has already proven that he can dominate the charts and command enormous audiences. What he wants now is something more lasting. He wants to create work that feels bigger than the moment in which it is released, something that can continue influencing people long after the cameras are gone. That ambition changes the way he approaches everything. A song is no longer just a recording. A performance is no longer just an appearance. Every project becomes an opportunity to create a complete experience. And Michael becomes increasingly interested in the details that connect all of those pieces together. The studio remains the heart of that process. Michael spends hours listening, experimenting, and refining ideas. He can become deeply focused on a single section of a song because he knows that one small change can affect the entire feeling of the track. For someone outside the process, this level of attention might seem excessive, but Michael sees it differently. He believes that the audience may not know exactly what changed, but they will feel the difference. That belief becomes part of his creative philosophy. If something does not feel right, it has to be fixed. If something feels ordinary, it has to be pushed further. And if something has already been done before, Michael wants to find a way to make it his own. This constant search for improvement is one of the reasons his work continues to evolve. He is not interested in simply copying his earlier success. He wants to challenge himself, even if that means taking risks that could divide audiences. The people working around him begin to understand that Michael's creativity does not follow a simple schedule. Ideas can appear suddenly, and a project can change direction because he discovers something new during the process. What starts as one concept can eventually become something completely different. That unpredictability can be difficult, but it is also part of what makes his work exciting. Michael is constantly asking what else is possible. What if the performance could feel more cinematic? What if the choreography became part of the storytelling? What if the music video could become an event of its own? Those questions lead him toward a style of entertainment that feels increasingly ambitious. Outside the studio, however, his personal world is becoming more difficult to control. The attention surrounding him is no longer limited to his music. People are fascinated by his appearance, his lifestyle, his relationships, and almost every unusual detail connected to his name. The public wants explanations, but Michael does not always want to provide them. That creates a gap. The more private he becomes, the more curious people become. And the more curious people become, the more attention follows him. It becomes a cycle that is difficult to break. Michael's fame also changes the way people approach him professionally. Every decision has financial consequences. Every project has enormous commercial expectations. Everyone involved knows how valuable his name is, and that can make creative decisions more complicated. Michael wants to protect the artistic side of his work, while the business side of the industry is naturally focused on schedules, budgets, promotion, and results. Balancing those two worlds becomes increasingly important. He understands that success requires business decisions, but he also knows that creativity can disappear if every decision is made purely for commercial reasons. That tension follows him into his biggest projects. He wants to create something that people will love, but he also wants to create something that feels honest to his artistic vision. And those goals do not always perfectly match. Still, when Michael enters the rehearsal space, the outside pressure becomes less important. This is where he is at his strongest. The dancers begin moving. The music fills the room. Michael watches every detail. If a movement is slightly late, he notices. If the energy drops, he notices. If the sequence does not communicate the emotion he imagined, he changes it. The rehearsals can continue for hours because Michael is trying to create something that will look effortless when the audience finally sees it. That is one of the hidden realities of his performances. The audience sees confidence. They do not see the repetition. They see the final movement. They do not see the hundreds of times it was practiced. They see the magic. They do not see the work required to create it. Michael understands this better than anyone, and perhaps that is why he remains so demanding. He knows that great performances are built long before the audience enters the room. As the project develops, his vision becomes clearer. The music starts connecting with the choreography. The visual ideas begin matching the emotional tone of the songs. The performance starts feeling like one complete piece rather than a collection of separate elements. This is exactly what Michael has been searching for, a complete experience. Something people can hear, something they can see, something they can remember. And as that experience begins taking shape, the anticipation around him grows again. People know Michael is preparing something, but they do not know exactly what it will be. That mystery becomes part of the excitement. When the moment finally arrives, the audience is ready. Michael steps onto the stage, and the atmosphere changes immediately. There is no need for a long explanation. The music begins, the movement starts, and the performer takes control. The response is immediate because the audience already understands the language Michael has spent years developing. They know the pauses, they recognize the rhythm, they know that a quiet moment may be followed by something explosive. Michael uses that knowledge to build anticipation. He does not give everything away at once. He lets the audience wait. Then he delivers. That ability to control timing becomes one of his greatest strengths. He understands that excitement is not created simply by moving faster or making the performance bigger. Sometimes the most powerful moment is the one where he does almost nothing. A pause, a look, a single movement. Then the music returns. The crowd erupts. This is why Michael's performances feel different from ordinary concerts. They are designed around emotion and anticipation rather than simply a list of songs. But the success of the performance also creates another problem. The standard becomes even higher. Now that Michael has shown the world this level of performance, people expect him to do it again and again and again. The pressure becomes almost impossible to escape. Yet Michael continues. He seems to understand that this is the price of reaching the level he wanted. The world has accepted him as one of the greatest performers alive. Now it wants proof every time he appears. As the story moves forward, that expectation will become increasingly important. Michael's career is entering a period where his achievements are no longer just personal victories. They are changing the entire industry around him. Other artists will follow the path he is creating. Other performers will study the techniques he is developing. And future generations will inherit a version of pop entertainment that looks completely different because Michael helped reshape it. But behind that enormous influence, Michael remains the same person searching for the next idea. He has reached another impossible height, and instead of stopping there, he looks toward the next one. Because for Michael Jackson, the greatest challenge has never been becoming famous. It has always been finding out how much further he can go. As Michael moves into the next phase of his journey, something becomes increasingly clear. The world is no longer watching an ordinary celebrity. It is watching a cultural phenomenon. His influence has reached music, dance, fashion, television, and live entertainment, and his name carries a level of recognition that very few people ever achieve. But with that recognition comes a difficult reality. The larger the legend becomes, the harder it is for the real person to live outside of it. Michael's creative ambition remains stronger than ever. He continues searching for ways to make his music feel fresh, even though his earlier work has already set enormous standards. He does not want to create something simply because people expect it from him. He wants to feel that the music has something new to say. That attitude keeps pushing him toward experimentation, and it also explains why his work continues changing from one period to another. Inside the studio, Michael becomes deeply involved in the smallest details. He listens to arrangements repeatedly, adjusts sounds, experiments with vocals, and considers how the finished music will translate to a live audience. He is always thinking beyond the recording itself. When he hears a particular rhythm, he may already imagine the choreography. When he hears a vocal phrase, he may imagine the lighting or the visual atmosphere surrounding it. That ability to think across different forms of entertainment becomes one of his greatest strengths. Music gives him the foundation. Dance gives the music movement. Visual storytelling gives it another layer. And performance brings all of those elements together. Michael understands that audiences experience entertainment with more than their ears. They remember images, emotions, movements, and moments. He wants his work to live in all of those places at once. That philosophy continues changing the way major music projects are created. But while his artistic world is expanding, his private world is becoming increasingly difficult to protect. Michael's fame has reached a level where people are interested in him even when he is doing nothing professionally. The public wants to know where he is, what he is doing, who he is spending time with, and what his next move will be. For Michael, that constant attention can become exhausting. There is a difference between being appreciated and being watched. Being appreciated can feel rewarding. Being watched can feel like there is nowhere to hide. Michael begins experiencing more of the second feeling. As his career grows, the movie uses this part of his story to show how fame can slowly change a person's relationship with ordinary life. Things that other people can do without thinking become complicated for Michael. He cannot simply go somewhere without being recognized. He cannot make a personal decision without risking public discussion. Even silence can become a reason for speculation. The irony is that Michael's success was built on connecting with millions of people. But that connection can also create distance from normal human relationships. The people around him become extremely important because trust becomes one of the few things he can control. But trust is not easy when someone has become as famous and valuable as Michael. There are always questions about motives. Is someone there because they care about him? Is someone interested in his career? Is someone looking for an opportunity? Michael has to learn how to recognize the difference. This becomes especially complicated when professional and personal relationships overlap. The people managing his career may have opinions about his choices. Friends may become involved in business decisions. Family relationships may carry the history of his childhood and the pressure of everything that came before. Michael is trying to build an adult identity while carrying decades of expectations. That is not an easy thing to do. Still, when he returns to music, he seems to regain his sense of direction. The studio gives him control. The rehearsal room gives him focus. The stage gives him freedom. That freedom is important because Michael's performances allow him to communicate emotions that he may not always express in conversation. His body becomes part of the storytelling. A movement can express confidence. A pause can express uncertainty. A change in rhythm can transform the entire mood. This is why his dancing becomes so inseparable from his music. He is not simply adding choreography to a song, he is creating another way to tell the story. As his performances become more sophisticated, the audience begins expecting them to be more than concerts. They become spectacles. The stage is transformed into a world, and Michael becomes the central character controlling everything that happens inside it. That approach influences performers far beyond his own generation. Artists begin realizing that they can build entire identities around performance. Music videos become more ambitious. Concerts become more theatrical. Choreography becomes a major part of an artist's brand, and the relationship between music and visual entertainment becomes stronger than ever. Michael is helping establish a new standard, but the standard creates another burden. When everyone expects greatness, ordinary success can feel like failure. Michael has to keep reaching higher. That means every new project becomes more stressful. He cannot simply ask whether a song is good. He has to ask whether it is good enough for Michael Jackson. That question carries enormous weight, yet his determination does not disappear. If anything, it becomes stronger. He continues working late, rehearsing movements, refining performances, and searching for new ideas. He remains intensely focused on creating something that will outlive the moment. There is also a growing sense that Michael is beginning to understand the power of legacy. He is not only thinking about what audiences will enjoy today. He is thinking about what people will remember tomorrow. He wants his music to survive changes in technology. He wants his performances to remain recognizable. He wants future artists to look back and understand where some of the ideas they use today came from. That desire gives his work a different kind of importance. He is not simply trying to win another chart battle. He is trying to leave a permanent mark. And by this point, he already has. But Michael's story is becoming more complicated because the legend is growing faster than the public's understanding of the person behind it. The audience knows the smile. They know the dance. They know the songs. They know the stage persona, but they do not necessarily know the private emotions of the person who created all of it. That gap between perception and reality will continue growing and the larger it becomes, the more difficult it will be for Michael to control his own story. Still, there is one thing he can control: his art. So he keeps creating. He keeps experimenting. He keeps rehearsing, and he keeps looking for the next moment that can make an audience forget everything else for a few minutes, because that is where Michael has always seemed most alive. Not when he is being interviewed. Not when cameras are following him. Not when people are discussing his private life, but when the music starts. When the lights come on, when the first beat reaches the audience, that is when the legend makes sense. And as Michael moves toward the next chapter, the world is about to see an even larger version of that legend. But this time, the scale of his success will bring opportunities and pressures that he has never experienced before. The higher he rises, the harder the fall could become. And Michael is about to discover just how heavy the crown can feel when the entire world expects you to wear it perfectly. When the entire world expects you to wear it perfectly. The weight of Michael's success becomes even more noticeable as he moves into another stage of his career. At this point, he has already accomplished things that most performers could only dream about, but the achievements that once felt impossible have now become the standard people expect from him. That creates a strange situation. Michael is still breaking records and attracting enormous audiences, yet the public quickly becomes accustomed to the extraordinary. What once looked unbelievable can eventually start feeling normal when the same person keeps doing it. Michael understands that better than anyone. He knows his audience wants to be surprised, but he also knows that constantly trying to shock people can eventually become exhausting. Instead of chasing attention for its own sake, he becomes more focused on creating work that has an emotional identity. He wants people to remember how his music made them feel, not simply remember that it was successful. That changes the way he approaches his next ideas. He becomes more selective about what he wants to put into the world. Every project has to feel like it belongs to him. He is not interested in following whatever happens to be popular at the moment. If a sound or visual style does not fit his vision, he would rather move in another direction than simply copy what is already working. This independence is one of the reasons Michael continues to stand apart from other artists. He has reached a level where he could easily repeat the same formula and still attract millions of people. But repeating himself would go against everything that made him successful in the first place. His career was built on taking risks, and he understands that remaining relevant means being willing to take another one. The creative process becomes more personal as well. Michael is not simply thinking about what audiences want to hear. He is thinking about what he wants to communicate. Some ideas are energetic and powerful, while others are more emotional and reflective. The variety gives his work a sense of depth because he is not trying to present only one version of himself. That becomes especially important as his public image grows larger. The world sees Michael as confident. The world sees the performer. The world sees the superstar. But there are parts of Michael that do not fit neatly into that image. Away from the stage, he can be much quieter and more private. He does not always want to explain himself, and he does not always feel comfortable with the amount of attention surrounding him. The difference between those two sides becomes one of the most interesting parts of his story. On stage, Michael can command thousands of people without saying much at all. Off stage, he has to deal with questions that no performance can answer. Who can he trust? How much of his life should he share? Where can he go without being followed? And how can he maintain a sense of normality when his name is recognized almost everywhere? These questions become increasingly difficult as his fame expands. The people around Michael also have to adjust to the changing reality. Some have been with him for years and understand how much his career has transformed his life. Others are newer and may see primarily the business opportunity surrounding his name. Michael has to navigate both groups. That means becoming more careful about decisions. It also means becoming more aware of how quickly circumstances can change. A person who seems supportive today may have different priorities tomorrow. A professional decision that appears harmless can have much larger consequences once millions of people are paying attention. Michael's instinct is often to return to the one place where he feels most certain. The creative process. In the studio, there are no cameras waiting for a reaction. There is only the music. He can experiment without immediately worrying about public opinion. He can try something unusual, reject it, start again, and keep searching until he finds the sound he wants. That freedom is extremely valuable to him. The same thing happens during rehearsals. Once the music begins, Michael becomes completely focused. He watches the dancers, listens to the rhythm, and studies how every movement connects to the next. He is trying to create something that feels natural, even though the preparation behind it is anything but natural. The audience may see a few minutes of choreography. Michael sees weeks of work. They see the finished costume. He sees every decision that went into it. They hear the final song. He remembers every version that came before it. That difference explains why he can be so demanding. Michael knows exactly how much work is hidden behind a polished performance, and he refuses to let that effort disappear because of one careless detail. As the next major performance takes shape, the excitement around him begins rising again. People want to know what he will do next, but Michael keeps his focus on the preparation rather than the speculation. He does not need to explain the performance before people see it. He wants them to experience it. That philosophy has always been part of his success. He understands that anticipation can be powerful, but surprise is even more powerful. If the audience knows exactly what is coming, the emotional impact becomes weaker. Michael wants to create moments that make people react before they even have time to understand what they are seeing. The rehearsal room becomes a place of constant adjustment. A movement changes. A transition becomes shorter. A musical section becomes stronger. The lighting is reconsidered. The timing is changed. Nothing is completely locked until Michael believes the entire performance works as one piece. Eventually, however, preparation has to end. The stage is ready. The audience arrives. The lights begin to fade. And once again, Michael walks into the environment where he seems to belong most naturally. The first moments are controlled and deliberate. He does not rush. He allows the audience to build anticipation. Then the performance begins to expand. The music becomes stronger. The choreography becomes more energetic. The audience responds louder, and Michael appears completely transformed by the atmosphere. This is the part of his life where the difference between Michael, the person, and Michael, the performer, becomes almost impossible to ignore. The performer seems larger than life, while the person behind that image remains vulnerable to the same pressures as anyone else. That contrast gives the performance another layer. People in the crowd are seeing an icon. Michael is simply doing what he has spent his entire life learning to do. Perform. But once the performance ends, the reality of his fame returns. The applause fades. The lights change. The audience leaves, and Michael returns to a world where the attention does not disappear so easily. The cameras remain. The questions remain. The expectations remain. This is the part of fame that audiences rarely see. A performer can walk away from the stage, but the public image continues moving without them. Stories continue. Opinions continue. People continue discussing what Michael said, what he wore, where he went, and what he might do next. The legend has developed a life of its own, and Michael is beginning to understand that controlling his art does not necessarily mean controlling his image. That realization becomes important because the next stage of his journey will involve even greater public attention. His achievements will become larger, but so will the scrutiny surrounding them. For now, though, Michael continues moving forward. He has spent years building a career based on imagination, discipline, and an unwillingness to settle. The world sees the results. But behind those results is a person who is still searching for something. Not another award, not another record. Not simply another successful performance. Something more permanent, something that can survive long after the spotlight disappears. Michael wants his work to become part of history. And little by little, it is. But history has a way of remembering both the achievements and the struggles. As Michael's story moves into its next chapter, those two sides of his life will begin coming together more closely than ever before. The music will continue. The performances will continue. The legend will continue growing. But the price of carrying that legend is about to become much harder to ignore. That legend is about to become much harder to ignore. As Michael's career continues to expand, the idea of fame itself starts becoming one of the biggest forces shaping his life. At first, fame had been something he worked toward. It meant more opportunities, bigger stages, and the freedom to create on a larger scale. But now fame has become something that follows him everywhere. He cannot simply switch it off when the performance ends, and that changes the way he experiences almost everything around him. The public has developed a powerful image of Michael. To millions of people, he is the voice behind unforgettable songs, the performer with extraordinary dance skills, and the artist who can turn a stage into something completely different. But the person behind that image is much more complicated. Michael has his own fears, frustrations, hopes, and private moments, and those things do not always fit the version of him that the public expects to see. That difference becomes increasingly important as the story moves forward. Michael continues working on his music because it remains the one area where he feels completely connected to himself. The studio gives him space to experiment, and he uses that space carefully. He can start with a simple idea and slowly develop it into something much larger. A melody becomes a song becomes a performance becomes a visual experience. This process is almost like building a world from nothing. Michael begins thinking about the emotion he wants the audience to feel before deciding exactly how the final product should look. If the music is energetic, the performance needs movement and power. If the music is emotional, the visuals need to create the right atmosphere. Everything has to support the same feeling. That attention to emotional detail separates his work from many ordinary pop performances. Michael is not simply asking whether something looks impressive. He is asking whether it means something. That question becomes more important as his career becomes more mature. He has already proven that he can create spectacle. Now he wants to create meaning inside the spectacle. His performances become increasingly polished, but there is still an emotional center underneath all the technical precision. He wants the audience to feel connected to the music, even when the production around it becomes enormous. This ability to combine scale with emotion is one of his greatest strengths. But the more successful he becomes, the more difficult it is to maintain that emotional connection in his private life. Michael is surrounded by people almost constantly, yet genuine privacy is becoming rare. His professional world is filled with managers, musicians, dancers, producers, security, and other people whose jobs depend on him. His personal world is also affected by the enormous amount of attention surrounding his name. It becomes difficult to know where one world ends and another begins. Even people who care about him have to understand that Michael's life is different from theirs. A normal conversation can become public if the wrong person hears it. A private outing can turn into a media story. A personal decision can become something strangers discuss around the world. That level of exposure can make a person cautious. Michael becomes increasingly protective of the parts of his life that belong only to him. But privacy is difficult to maintain when millions of people are curious. The more Michael protects himself, the more mysterious he appears. And the more mysterious he appears, the more people want answers. It becomes another cycle that is difficult to escape. At the same time, Michael's influence continues spreading through the entertainment industry. Artists who grew up watching him begin developing their own careers with elements of his style. His approach to choreography becomes a reference point. His visual storytelling becomes an example of what a major music release can accomplish. He has helped create a new expectation for pop artists. They are no longer expected to simply sing. They are expected to perform. They are expected to create an image. They are expected to produce memorable visuals. And increasingly, they are expected to make their music feel like an event. Michael helped establish that expectation. But being responsible for raising the standard means he also has to live under it. Every time he appears, people compare him to his greatest performances. Every new song is compared with his biggest songs. Every new dance move is compared with the movements that already became iconic. The past becomes another competitor. Michael has to fight against his own history. That is an unusual burden for any artist. Imagine creating something so successful that your own previous work becomes the standard you are expected to beat. That is the position Michael finds himself in. Still, he continues taking risks. He experiments with new sounds. He explores different visual ideas. He develops new choreography. He searches for collaborators who can help him create something unexpected. The goal is not to become different simply for the sake of being different. The goal is to evolve without losing the emotional identity that made people connect with him in the first place. That balance becomes increasingly difficult. Change can alienate people. Staying the same can make an artist feel outdated. Michael tries to find the middle ground. He wants the audience to recognize him immediately. But he also wants them to feel that they have never seen this version of him before. That tension becomes part of his artistic identity. Meanwhile, the business side of his career becomes more complicated. With projects operating on such a large scale, Every decision involves enormous amounts of money and attention. A successful release can generate massive opportunities, but a disappointing project can create equally massive criticism. Michael has to think about both sides. He wants creative freedom. The industry wants predictable results. He wants time to perfect the work. The business world wants schedules. He wants to experiment. The people around him want to know whether the experiment will succeed. These pressures do not always fit together comfortably, but Michael continues insisting on his vision. That determination is one of the qualities that helped him reach this level in the first place. He knows that if he allows every outside opinion to control his decisions, the work will eventually stop feeling like his. So he keeps returning to the music. The music becomes the place where everything makes sense. The noise of fame becomes quieter. The expectations become less important. There is only the sound, and then the performance. That connection between Michael and the stage remains incredibly powerful. Whenever the lights come on, he appears to become completely present. The crowd can feel that focus, and that is one reason his performances create such a strong emotional response. People are not simply watching a famous person, they are watching someone who has spent almost his entire life learning how to perform. Every movement has history behind it. Every gesture has practice behind it. Every moment of confidence has been built through years of discipline. That is why the final performance can look effortless even when the preparation was exhausting. The audience sees the result. Michael remembers the process. And as the story continues, that process becomes increasingly important because the pressure surrounding his career is becoming more intense. He has reached a level where almost anything he does can become a public event. That means the distance between success and controversy can become very small. A decision that seems personal can become a headline. A misunderstanding can become a worldwide discussion. A rumor can grow faster than the truth. Michael is entering a period where managing his public image will become almost as challenging as managing his music career. But there is one thing that remains consistent. He refuses to stop creating. No matter how complicated the outside world becomes, he keeps looking for the next idea. Because Michael has never been comfortable with standing still, he has always believed that there is another level, another performance. Another song. Another moment. And that belief is now pushing him toward a new stage of his career where the stakes will be higher than ever. The world already knows Michael Jackson, the superstar. What it is about to see is how difficult it can be to remain a human being when the superstar has become larger than life. The more Michael's career grows, the more difficult it becomes to separate achievement from pressure. He has reached a point where almost every major decision carries enormous consequences, and the expectations surrounding him are no longer limited to music. People expect him to look a certain way, perform a certain way, and constantly deliver something extraordinary. But Michael is still an artist, and artists naturally change as they grow. That tension becomes especially noticeable when he begins thinking about what comes next. He does not want to live permanently inside the version of himself that audiences already know. He wants to explore new ideas and discover what else he can do. The problem is that the world has become attached to the Michael it already understands. This makes reinvention risky. If he changes, people may criticize him. If he stays the same, people may say he has lost his creativity. Michael understands there is no perfect solution, so he chooses the path that has always defined his career. He trusts his instincts and keeps moving. His creative process becomes even more deliberate. Instead of rushing toward the next release, he spends time thinking about the feeling he wants the project to create. He studies different sounds, experiments with arrangements, and considers how the music could translate into a live performance. The goal is no longer simply to make people listen. He wants them to experience the music. That difference is important, because Michael has become one of the artists who understands the power of a complete performance. A song can exist on the radio, but the audience can experience a completely different version of it on stage. The choreography adds emotion. The lighting creates atmosphere. The visual presentation gives the music another identity. Michael wants every part of that experience to feel connected. He also becomes increasingly aware of the importance of pacing. A performance cannot remain at maximum intensity from beginning to end. The audience needs moments of calm before the next explosion of energy. Michael understands how to create that contrast. A quiet moment can make the next movement feel twice as powerful. A pause can make a crowd hold its breath. A simple gesture can become more memorable than an entire sequence of complicated choreography. That understanding of timing is one of the reasons his performances continue to feel so different. But while his artistic confidence is growing, his private world remains complicated. Michael's fame has created a strange situation where millions of people feel emotionally connected to him even though most of them have never met him. His music may have been part of their childhood, their relationships, their celebrations, or difficult moments in their lives. That emotional connection is real for the audience, but it does not mean they know the person behind the music. Michael has to live with that difference. People may think they understand him based on interviews, performances, photographs, or rumors, but there are parts of his personality that remain private, and he becomes increasingly protective of them. This is where the story takes on a more emotional tone. Michael has spent much of his life being observed. As a child, he was watched by his family and expected to perform. As a young artist, he was watched by the industry. As a global superstar, he is watched by the entire world. There is almost no stage of his life where he is completely free from expectations. That history explains why privacy becomes so important to him. It also explains why the people closest to him matter so much. Michael needs people who can treat him like a person rather than a product. But finding those relationships is difficult because fame can change the way people behave around you. Some people become nervous, some become ambitious, some become overly protective. Some see opportunities, and some genuinely care. The challenge is knowing which is which. Michael's growing independence also means that he is making more decisions for himself. The boy who once followed the direction of his family has become a powerful artist with his own ideas. That transformation is not always easy for everyone around him, but Michael has reached a point where he cannot build his future entirely around other people's expectations. He has to decide what kind of artist he wants to be. And he chooses ambition. He chooses creativity. He chooses to keep experimenting. That choice leads him toward increasingly ambitious projects. The scale of his productions becomes larger, but Michael remains focused on the emotional core. He does not want technology or expensive production to replace the music. Everything still has to begin with the song. Once the music is strong, the other elements can build around it. This philosophy keeps his work grounded even as the spectacle grows. The choreography is there because it adds something. The visuals are there because they communicate something. The costumes are there because they help create a character or atmosphere. The lighting is there because it changes the audience's emotional experience. Nothing is supposed to exist simply for decoration. That level of intention is one of the reasons Michael's performances become so memorable. But there is another side to perfection. Perfection can become exhausting. Michael has trained himself to notice every flaw, and that means he can rarely look at a finished project without seeing something that could be improved. Even when the audience is satisfied, he may still feel that something is missing. That mindset pushes him toward greatness, but it can also make it difficult for him to relax. There is always another detail. Another rehearsal. Another adjustment. Another idea. The work never really ends, and as the public waits for his next major move, Michael is once again operating under enormous pressure. People want another unforgettable moment. They want another performance that becomes part of pop culture. They want another song that dominates the conversation. Michael wants all of those things too, but for a different reason. He wants to create something that feels meaningful, something that represents where he is now rather than simply repeating where he has been. That distinction matters because Michael's career is moving into a period where the expectations surrounding him are becoming almost impossible to satisfy. The public wants the legend. Michael still has to live as the person. And those two identities are becoming harder to balance. Yet when the music starts, the conflict disappears. The stage lights rise. The audience becomes quiet. Michael steps forward. And suddenly, everything makes sense. The performer takes control. The movements begin. The rhythm builds. The audience reacts. For a few minutes, there are no questions about his private life. No rumors. No pressure. No expectations. There is only the performance. That is where Michael seems most comfortable because performance is the language he has understood since childhood. It is the place where he can communicate without explaining himself. And perhaps that is why he continues returning to it even when the rest of his life becomes Complicated. As this part of the story comes to an end, Michael is standing at another turning point. His career has already changed popular entertainment, but his next chapter will test how much further that influence can go. The world has seen him become a star. It has seen him become a global icon. Now it is waiting to see what happens when that icon has to deal with the enormous consequences of becoming one of the most recognizable people on Earth. The music is still there. The ambition is still there. The audience is still waiting, but the pressure has never been greater, and Michael is about to enter a chapter where his personal life and public image will become impossible to keep completely separate. By this stage of Michael's journey, the difference between success and sacrifice has become impossible to ignore. He has achieved the kind of fame that most people can only imagine, but every achievement has brought another responsibility with it. The world expects Michael to remain extraordinary, even when he is simply trying to live his life. That expectation follows him into the studio, onto the stage, and even into the quiet moments when he wants to be away from the spotlight. Yet Michael continues to create. That is the one constant that has remained with him since childhood. No matter how much his life changes, music remains the place where he can turn everything he feels into something meaningful. He does not need to explain every emotion directly because the music can speak for him. A melody can express something he cannot put into words, and a performance can communicate an emotion that a conversation might never capture. This becomes even more important as the pressure around him grows. Michael understands that people are watching his career very closely. Every new project is compared with what came before it. Every performance is measured against the moments that made him famous. The audience wants something familiar enough to feel like Michael, but new enough to surprise them. That is a difficult balance. Michael cannot simply repeat his greatest achievements because the audience has already experienced them. At the same time, changing everything could make the work feel disconnected from the artist people have followed for years. So he looks for another approach. He keeps the emotional identity of his music while continuing to experiment with the way that music is presented. The sound may evolve, the choreography may change, the visual style may become more ambitious. But underneath all of it, the goal remains the same: connect with the audience. That connection has always been the heart of Michael's success. It is easy to look at his career and focus only on the huge crowds, the famous performances, and the global attention. But those things are only the result. The real reason people continue responding to Michael is because his performances make them feel involved. When he steps onto a stage, he does not perform as though the audience is simply watching from a distance. He creates the feeling that everyone in the room is part of the moment. That ability has taken years to develop. Michael has learned how to control silence, timing, movement, and energy. He understands when to give the audience everything and when to make them wait. He understands that anticipation can sometimes be more powerful than the performance itself. A single pause can make thousands of people hold their breath. Then one movement can release all that tension. That is the kind of control Michael has developed. But the same attention to detail that makes his performances extraordinary also makes his private life more difficult. Michael is constantly thinking about how things appear, how they feel, and how they will be remembered. When that mindset follows someone into everyday life, even simple decisions can become complicated. The public does not always see those complications. They see the final image. They see the polished performance. They see the famous smile. They see the confident performer walking across the stage. They do not see the person thinking about what happens when the lights go out. That contrast becomes increasingly important. Michael's public image has become so powerful that it almost exists independently of him. People have their own idea of who Michael Jackson is, and those ideas can be completely different depending on who you ask. For some people, he is the ultimate entertainer. For others, he represents an entire generation of music. For younger performers, he is an influence. For fans, his music may be connected to personal memories that have nothing to do with the details of his private life. Michael has become different things to different people, and once an artist reaches that level, controlling the narrative becomes almost impossible. He can control the music, he can control the performance, he can control what he chooses to reveal, but he cannot control every interpretation. That reality begins weighing heavily on his journey. Still, Michael refuses to allow outside opinions to completely determine his creative decisions. He has spent too much of his life developing his own artistic instincts to suddenly abandon them because people are talking. Instead, he becomes more focused. The studio sessions continue, the rehearsals continue, the ideas continue. He works with musicians and performers, testing different possibilities and searching for the combination that feels right. Sometimes the process is frustrating. Sometimes an idea that seemed perfect in his head does not work in reality. Sometimes a performance needs to be rebuilt. But Michael understands that failure during the creative process is not the same thing as failure in front of an audience. In the studio, he can experiment, he can make mistakes, he can start again. That freedom allows him to take risks. And risk has always been an important part of his career. If Michael had simply repeated what everyone else was doing, he might have become successful, but he would not have become the artist people remember. His greatest strength is his willingness to imagine something that does not exist yet and then work until it becomes real. That ability continues shaping the next stage of his career. The projects become more ambitious, but the purpose remains surprisingly simple. Make people feel something. Make them remember the moment. Give them a reason to come back. Michael understands that entertainment is ultimately about emotion. Technology can improve a performance, production can make it larger, and money can increase its scale, but none of those things matter if the audience does not feel connected to what they are seeing. That is why Michael continues placing music at the center. Everything begins with the song. Then comes the movement. Then the visuals. Then the performance. And finally, the audience completes the experience. That philosophy helps explain why his work can feel larger than the individual pieces that create it. As the story moves forward, however, another reality becomes impossible to ignore. Michael's career is reaching a point where his personal choices will attract almost as much attention as his artistic achievements. The world wants to know everything, and Michael wants to keep some things for himself. That conflict is not going away. In fact, it is only becoming stronger. The more recognizable he becomes, the more valuable his privacy becomes. The more he protects that privacy, the more curious people become. And the more curious people become, the more pressure surrounds him. It is a cycle with no easy solution. For now, Michael chooses the only response he truly trusts. He keeps working. He returns to the studio. He steps into rehearsals. He prepares for the next performance. And when the lights finally come on, all the noise outside disappears again. The audience sees the performer they came to see. Michael moves with confidence. The music builds, the crowd reacts, and for those few minutes, the complicated world surrounding him seems to disappear. This is why the stage remains so important. It is not just where Michael performs. It is where he feels understood. The audience may not know everything about him, but they understand the emotion he gives them through the music. That connection is enough. As the performance ends, the applause fills the room. Michael stands there for a moment, taking in the reaction, but there is no sense that he is finished, because somewhere in his mind, the next idea is already forming. Another song. Another performance. Another challenge. Another chance to create something that did not exist before. That relentless desire is what has carried him from a young performer surrounded by his family to one of the most recognizable artists in the world. And it is also what makes the next chapter so important. Michael has spent his entire life chasing the next level of creativity. Now the question is no longer whether he can become a legend. He already has. The question is whether he can continue carrying that legend while protecting the person who created it. The spotlight is brighter than ever, the expectations are heavier than ever, and the world is watching more closely than ever. But Michael is still moving forward, because stopping has never been part of his story.